Journey of the Magi by T.S. Eliot. The poem delves into themes of sacrifice, spiritual awakening, and the pursuit of meaning in the face of existential uncertainty. By depicting the Magi's challenging voyage and their eventual encounter with the divine, Eliot encourages readers to contemplate the profound significance of faith and the transformative power inherent in encountering the sacred. Journey of the Magi poem summary. A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year. The speaker describes the challenging conditions of their journey, highlighting the harshness of winter. For a journey, and such a long journey, the ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter. The journey is depicted as long and difficult, with deep snow and bitter cold, made worse by the winter season. The traveling Magi starts the poem by giving a broad overview of the journey he and the other Magi embarked on. It was not a pleasant trip. They had a cold coming of it. The men were forced to deal with terrible weather that made everything harder. The speaker reflects on the days of travel as having occurred in the worst time of the year for a journey. Due to the fact that they could not choose when they traveled, they had to face these conditions. And the camels galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. The camels are suffering, with sore feet and resisting further travel, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. The travelers reminisce about the comforts of their homes and the luxuries they left behind. Then the camel men cursing and grumbling and running away, and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out, and the lack of shelters, and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. The difficulties of the journey are exacerbated by the behavior of the camel handlers, the challenges of finding shelter, and the inhospitable nature of the cities, towns, and villages they encounter. It does away with the image of majestic beings riding in to visit the child. Instead, they are painted as deeply human. They suffered just as anyone would traversing the countryside. The speaker even states at one point that there were times we regretted, or missed, the summer palaces, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. These were all elements of their home which were familiar to them and without which they were made to travel. At the end we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears, saying that this was all folly. To avoid the hardships, the travelers decide to journey at night, resting only briefly and feeling as though their efforts are futile. Troubles with nature. They faced hostile cities and unfriendly towns that were unwilling to help them. The men had a hard time of it. By the time they got to To the end of their journey, they had learned to prefer traveling at night. This way they could avoid the worst that the landscape, and the cities it held, had to offer. Then at dawn we came down to a temperate valley, wet, below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a watermill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on the low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Their spirits lift upon reaching a pleasant valley with flowing water, signs of life, and a sense of tranquility. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins, but there was no information, and so we continued and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon finding the place. It was, you may say, satisfactory. They stop at a tavern where people are gambling and drinking, but they receive no helpful information about their journey. Few changes come over the party of travelers. The speaker describes a dawn in which they came down to a temperate valley. This is a landscape that is quite unfamiliar to them as they had spent so much time traveling through such terrible conditions. The valley is below the snow line and it smells of vegetation. It is clear from these first lines that they have come to a much better place. There is running water and a watermill beating in the dark. Eventually, the men make their way to All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again, but set down this. Were we led all that way for birth or death? Reflecting on their journey, the speaker questions the purpose of their travels, pondering whether it was for a birth or a death. There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. The speaker recalls witnessing a difficult birth that felt akin to their own suffering and death. The speaker halts his description of the journey and moves on to describe how he feels about the entire experience now. It is clear he has terrible memories of the trip, but what of the manager itself? He begins by saying it was a long time ago, but that he would do it again. It was, at least in his mind, a journey worth undertaking. It is at this point in the poem the speaker directs a question to his listener to whom he is telling the story. He knows that there certainly was a birth. This is the case as there was evidence and no doubt, but what of the death? In the next lines, he equates birth and death. This particular birth was so painful to the Magi and their companions that it was like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here, in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. Upon returning home, the travelers feel out of place and uncomfortable, surrounded by people who worship different gods. After the trip was over, they returned to their places, these kingdoms. When they arrived there and attempted to settle back into the lives they once knew and loved, they were no longer at ease. Everything had changed for them. The men did not feel comfortable in this world in which alien people were clutching their gods when they had seen the true God. I should be glad of another death. The speaker expresses a desire for another death, suggesting a longing for release from their current state of discomfort and alienation. The poem concludes with the speaker stating that he would be glad to die another death. Perhaps this one could bring him to his final rest alongside God.